Hi everyone and welcome to Creative Cakes by Sharon. If you're new to my channel, welcome and thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to be showing you how to create this awesome 3D cake of Paddington Bear. If you've seen the new Paddington movie, I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you're going to enjoy watching me create this little teddy bear. Guys, just a reminder, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, make sure you click the subscribe button so you can see all my creative cakes as I release them. So let's get started.
I have here 2 balloon cups, and they might also be known as balloon fasteners, as well as 2 short plastic dowels which are about 2 inches in length. These are going to form the legs for Paddington, as well as provide the support and stability for the entire body. So I'm going to use a hot glue gun to adhere the balloon cups to the board, making sure they're not too far apart when I secure them. Approximately ½ an inch is fine. Then I'm going to glue the plastic dowels on top of the balloon cups, taking a moment to ensure they set in a nice straight position. Guys, it's important to be aware that while this structure will support this particular cake, it's really only suitable for domestic purposes, so I'll show you later on in another video how to create a structure that can withstand transportation if that's something you require. Now I have here 2 6-inch round chocolate cakes, and I'm going to just trim a slight amount off the top of each cake, making sure they still have some roundness on the edges, and then I'm going to cut them each in half. Guys, this particular cake is super moist, rich, and of course delicious. And if you'd like the recipe, you can click the link you see on screen now, and I'll also leave a link in the description box below. I'm going to start building the body now, and I'm going to first start with one of the top pieces of cake which has the rounded edge, turning it upside down. This will be the bottom of Paddington's tummy, which is why I left the edges nice and round. In between each layer of cake, I'm going to use a filling of dark chocolate ganache, and the last layer is going to be the top of the other cake with the rounded side up this time, as this will be the top of his torso and shoulder region. To increase the stability of the cake, I've inserted a plastic dowel right through the centre of all of the cakes, and this was about 5½ inches long. I now need to completely cover the cake with ganache and pop it in the fridge to set for about 15 minutes. Normally I would follow up this step by smoothing out my ganache until the surface is perfectly smooth. But since I'm creating a bear who is covered in fur, a little bit of texture will add some realness to the cake. While the body of the cake is in the fridge, I'm going to start work on Paddington's head. So I have here another 6-inch round chocolate cake which I've cut in half, and using a pastry cutter I'm going to cut a circle of cake out of each half, and this is going to form the head. Then using one of the leftover pieces I'm going to cut half a circle of cake out, so I end up with a shape that's like a crescent moon. This is going to be Paddington's hat. Since he is always wearing his hat, we don't really need to worry about creating his ears. Using a little bit of ganache, I'm going to stick the bottom piece of cake to my tiny 3-inch cake setup board, and then layer the 2 remaining pieces of cake using a filling of ganache in between each one. Then using a sharp knife, I'm going to gently round off the edges of the top and bottom of the round bits of cake, and then cover the entire cake in ganache. Then it's time to pop this piece of cake in the fridge to set and remove the other piece that we had sitting in there earlier. I've got my hot glue gun again, and I'm going to add some glue to the top of each dowel and gently sit the cake on top, making sure it's properly centered. It should be able to balance on its own when I remove my hands, and because the ganache has already set in the fridge, it doesn't rub off on my hands. Now it's time for the fun part, and that's adding the fondant to start making this cake actually look like Paddington Bear. So using some brown fondant, I'm going to create 2 flat rounds and make a cut into one side of each piece. Then opening up this cut, I'm going to wrap the fondant around each of the balloon cups, pinching the fondant at the back to close up the seam, I'm also going to squeeze the fondant in a little bit so that I can push my thumbs through the centre to make sure there's a nice gap between each foot. For the legs, I've created 2 oblong pieces of brown fondant, and before I wrap each piece around the dowels, I'm going to dab a little bit of flour glue around the feet and dowel to help the fondant adhere properly. Once again, I'm going to pinch the fondant at the back to close up the seam. Now just where the 2 pieces of fondant meet, I'm just using my fingers to blend the 2 together. To create Paddington's fur, I'm using a wooden tool to press into the fondant and make little divots. A toothpick or even a wooden skewer will also work fine for this. Make sure to go right around both legs, and at the ankle joint spend a little bit of extra time to create the divots so the seam is no longer visible. To finish off his feet, I'm going to press my wooden tool into the fondant to create some little toes. For Paddington's body, I decided to keep his coat open slightly so that you could see his tummy. That way it would add a little bit more interest to the front of the cake. So I've covered the front centre of the cake with a flat, narrow piece of brown fondant, which I've just adhered using a little bit of the edible flour glue and making sure that it runs from the top of the cake all the way to the bottom of the tummy. And then again, I've textured the fondant to get the fur look. Now I'm ready to start the coat, so I've rolled out some blue fondant and I'm going to add some edible flour glue to the back half of the cake, stopping on either side where the seam of a coat would naturally be. This is because I actually want to have a visible seam on either side of the cake to make it look more realistic. Then once I've stuck the fondant onto the cake, I can cut away the excess and the fondant will come away nice and easily since the edible glue was only applied to the back half of the cake. You can see my fondant was tall enough to cover the top of the cake, which is exactly what you need. Before I move on, I'm going to run my fingers along this bottom edge of the fondant to make sure it's not stuck to the cake and it's hanging freely just like a real coat would be. The front sides of the coat are added in the same way as the back was, and this time I have a little bit of extra fondant at the top which I need to trim off. Then I run my fingers over the joint to make sure it's nice and smooth. The front part of the coat needs to overlap the fur slightly, and to add a little movement to the coat I've turned the fondant out at the top and bottom corners. Now using this stitching tool, I'm going to create some seams around the edges. If you don't have one of these at home, you could always use a toothpick to poke little holes and create the stitching effect. Paddington's arms are very easy to make using a piece of blue fondant, tapering it up slightly and flattening it on one end, and then on the other end pressing the fondant in so that when I make the hand, or paws in this case for a bear, they're tucked up nicely into the sleeve. Using my wooden tool again, I'm going to add a few little creases to the insides of the elbows and then attach both arms to the sides of the cake using some edible glue and a couple of toothpicks for extra support. Here I'm adding a little bit of detail with 2 tiny blue strips of fondant to look like little cuffs on the sides of the sleeves. To make the hood, I've cut out my fondant in a sort of a bell shape, and as soon as I place it onto the cake, I need to fold up the back side to make it look like the hood. Then at the front, I need to turn the fondant up and back, trimming off any excess and tucking it under the top corner of the coat. Finally, I'm up to the head and I've removed the cake from the fridge, and I'm going to stick some brown fondant around the bottom half of the cake, trimming off the excess at the back and tucking the fondant at the bottom underneath the cake board. I'm going to also stick on a little extra piece of fondant to make the muzzle stand out a little bit more, and before I start texturing the fondant, I'll just make an indentation where the nose is going to be. Then, working out and around this spot, I'll start creating the fur. Moving up towards the eyes, I'll mark the fondant again where I want the position of the eyes to be, and then again work out and around each eye. This creates a more realistic look to the fur if you work outwards from the features rather than working in straight lines. At the moment he looks a little bit funny without his hat, so I'm just covering the top of the cake with a round piece of red fondant and using a long rectangle to create the brim. The rest of the elements come together fairly quickly now that the main structure of the cake is completed. To finish off the face, I've rolled some black fondant for the eyes and the nose, and for the front of the coat, I've added the button and stitching details. You can add as many or as little details to the coat as you like. Now that all the details are finished on the coat, I need to add Paddington's paws, so I'm adding a nice round piece of brown fondant to the bottom of each sleeve and creating the fur texture with my wooden tool. And last, but by no means least, this little bear wouldn't be complete without this handwritten card which I've tied around his neck with a real little piece of string together with his little suitcase. So guys, I hope you enjoyed watching me create this cute little bear. Don't forget to give it a like if you did. Also, just a reminder to click on the subscribe button to make sure you're always updated with my recipes and creative cakes. I love to hear from you guys, so drop me a line in the comment section below. Let me know your feedback and your suggestions as I try to work my way through many of the requests that I receive. If you do happen to recreate any of my cakes, I'd love to see them, and you can connect with me on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram or Twitter. I hope you tune in next time, and as always, thanks for watching.